We're delivering work in an analog system for a digital world. And I think the generations that are coming through have got a different view of the world. That 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and I appreciate that doesn't take into account hospitality, but that kind of 9 to 5, Monday, Friday, that how we do things, the working to the quarters, the fitting in that way. You will work in the way that I work.
Today's guest is Amanda Arrowsmith, Executive Director of People and OD at the Royal British Legion, where she leads people strategy and organisational development at one of the UK's most respected charities. She is also the founder of Sisterhood of Women and serves as a non-executive director at the Disclosure and Barring Service.
How you found yourself in these roles and the current one, and what's led you there?
I was incredibly fortunate. I went into Evershed Solicitors as a personnel administrator and then personnel officer, and I worked for a brilliant lady called...
But maybe in 15 years' time we'll be looking back at them talking about people and thinking that was wrong too.
The thing about being a people director is everything you did as a personnel director and everything you did as an HR officer, you still do as well now.
Amanda, welcome to The Power Between.
Roddy, good morning. It's lovely to see you.
No, it's really fun to have you here. Looking forward to this conversation. You've had lots of different experiences in your career. You're now sort of firmly in the role of being an interim people direct organisational change director, and currently with the Royal British Legion, which is a really interesting organisation in itself. So perhaps just give us a little bit of an introduction in your own words as to how you found yourself in these roles and the current one, and what's led you there.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So I started my career in the civil service way back in the 90s. I fell into an HR role on relocating from London to Yorkshire. And I was incredibly fortunate. I went into Evershed Solicitors as a personnel administrator and then personnel officer. And I worked for a brilliant lady called Melanie Galling, who was one of those people that when you first move into a role, she just coached brilliantly. And she made you believe that you could do things. And she gave you that kind of stretch and gave you that opportunity. And I fell into HR and realised that I absolutely loved it. And I loved that tying together. And this is something that Melanie really kind of instilled into you, of what the business needed, what the business did, but then how you enabled those people to deliver that and how HR could be that glue that drives that forward. So that was back in 1997, so nearly 30 years ago. And I've now had a 30-year career working in people and organisational development and change. Mid-2000s, I moved into interim work and have been fortunate the last kind of 25 years to do long-term interim roles or short-term permanent roles, long-term interim roles, depends how you look at it, where I've gone in and worked with organisations who are going through some form of transformational change. And I have come and really talked about the people side of that, the behaviour side of that, the culture side of that. Sometimes in difficult situations where perhaps there's been downsizing, closing, reductions in workforce, but then also when you've gone through growth and new strategy. And then so I landed at the Royal British Legion last September as their ridiculous job title, Executive Director of People and Organisational Development. And I'm here for a couple of years to help them to really get in the right shape to deliver their 10-year strategy. Fantastic charity and organisation. I think we're known best, obviously, for the poppy appeal and for remembrance, but as an organisation, we serve thousands and thousands of beneficiaries a year through casework, supporting with accessing benefits, helping them to with housing, helping them with all sorts of things. We do some brilliant diversionary therapy recovery at something called our Battleback Centre in Lillishall, which is where serving and ex-serving personnel can come and spend a week doing diversionary therapy activities. It could be anything from wheelchair basketball to art to lots of different things. And then we also have care homes. So as an organisation, thinking at it from a kind of HRE people point of view, I've got national living wage, hourly paid, bit precarious, high turnover workers, through to people who run the most amazing, brilliant remembrance events for events such as Bosnia 30, which we had in December, which was 30 years since the Dayton Peace Accord, VJ, our Festival of Remembrance, and everything in between. About 2,000 people And yeah, I love it. As you can tell, I love what I do and I love where I do it.
Lots of energy in there. Yeah, exactly.
One more thing, I'm afraid. I'm also, because I'm a glutton for punishment, currently studying my doctorate. So I'm currently studying for a doctorate in business administration, or I believe I'm a doctoral candidate is the correct term, at the University of West of England Business School, and I am focusing on people transformation and change in the not-for-profit sector, and how CPOs have a role in that and what that looks like. I'm only in my second year, so thankfully I'm very much in the literature phase, not in the writing phase. But yeah, loving it.
I'm a great fan of DBAs. They're slightly broader in scope than perhaps a pure PhD, and they're much more practical in the application or the question that you're trying to answer.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. I have a friend called Dr. Gemma Dale, who's at Liverpool John Moores University, and I was talking to her about doing some further study, and she was the one who said, "You need to do a DBA, Amanda. PhD, yes, you'll love it, but actually, because you are quite commercial and business focused, the DBA is a thing that will really ignite you because you are very much look." PhDs are brilliant. They take that thinking forward. They take that academia forward. With where the DBA is slightly different for me is you have to have a value for the business. There needs to be how does that change business? And that ticks a lot of buttons for me because I didn't go to university. I went straight into the civil service at 19. So
You're going to get from no degree to a doctorate in one step. Is that right?
I did my master's.
You have that. You
But
have
not
been
just
one
no
in
degree,
between.
no A levels. I didn't take a very traditional route through my career and through what I did. I was the first year of GCSEs, so you can figure out how old I am with that. And then unfortunately I was ill during my A levels, didn't do my A levels. So academia, I always thought it wasn't for me. I was always very scared of it. I always felt like an imposter around all these very clever people. And then again, Melanie encouraged me to do my CIPD qualifications. I realized I liked learning. I've always loved reading. And yeah, that curiosity has put me in good stead. And now here I am. Hopefully in 5-6 years' time, I'll be Dr. Amanda Arrowsmith. We'll see.
I'm sure you shall be. It's slightly off track for what we talk about, but this bit about around education is really interesting. I think lots of people, when they're expected to do their GCSEs or A levels, are just not an educationally mature enough stage often to be interested in it. They're interested in lots of other things, which is perfectly. I'm looking at my children here for doing that, and casting my eye back to when I did it. Now I did it, and I went to university, and they've done it, and they've gone to university. But in fact, my eldest daughter, now 3 years post university, is suddenly beginning to find all the things that she studied at university much more interesting than she did when she was at university. And I think there's just that sort of.
So always saying that education is wasted on the young. Is that what we're saying?
Well, it is wasted on the young. Yeah. So in many respects, coming to it a little bit later, it's really not a bad thing at all. And then you've got some experience of other stuff underneath your belt to go on with. So there's structural issues around that. I think we don't want people are terrified of tinkering with because it's so sort of set in our ways. And
yeah, very much so. But I did my master's at Birkbeck, and I don't know if you know Birkbeck, but Birkbeck is really fantastic for that kind of adult education, that remote working. And whilst I found it really challenging, the going into kind of an academic setting from going from a very commercial and corporate setting, I found that the two very different worlds. Actually, I think what Birkbeck does and the model that it uses allows people who bring their work experience and bring that learning into an academic setting in a really positive way. And I think, and lots of universities do it. I just happened to have done my master's at Birkbeck, and it was something really eye-opening. And my chap who ran our whole cohort, Mark, and I'm stumbling because I'm trying to remember his surname and I can't remember it because I'm terrible at surnames. He'd been an ex-chief people officer at massive commercial organizations before he'd moved into academia. So for those of us that were working in that space, he really understood the reality, that kind of sometimes that gap between the text, the reality, the philosophy, the theory, and then what that meant in practice when you've got shareholders and you've got people coming through who are you're trying to develop their careers and you're trying to bring them through at the same time as going, but we'd really like to talk about change and we'd like to talk about this philosophy and this theory. But actually you've got people who are going, how do I deal day to day? How can I improve this? How can I do that? And finding that balance was, just something that I thought was really good.
Well, it's all part of that transition, that transformation, isn't it? That
definitely.
That we're always grappling for. The other thing that you said, you started out and when it was Eversheds, was it you said, and your job title was personnel something assistant. Yeah, and personnel, I think even by the late 80s was beginning to be seen as being, quite old fashioned. And then we moved into a period of HR, human resources, which seemed terribly modern at the time, but now seems really quite sort of transactionary. And now we're talking about people, which is probably much better. But maybe in 15 years' time, we'll be looking back at them talking about people and thinking that was wrong too. But it's interesting, that transition. I'm a publisher at heart, so I'm interested in words that we've looked, or what we call this area of activity has changed from being, and personnel is very impersonal. Human resources is really quite sort of transactionary. But people, I think, it is good. It seems to me at the moment that, because that's what we're dealing with.
I think it is. I think the challenge, and if we go back to when some of this kind of workers' welfare stuff came in, and where HR is born from, and that kind of people side is born from, and you look at the Joseph Rowntree, and that's a really good example of that kind of workers' welfare stuff. The thing about being a people director is everything you did as a personnel director or a personnel officer, and everything you did as an HR officer, you still do as well now. So the role itself, you're still doing that hygiene, foundation, performance management, maternity, paternity, bereavement leave, absence, pay, grade, all that hygiene stuff around making work good for people and making it work, as well as now very much thinking about behaviors and culture, and how do we bring that real belonging and inclusion piece to every lens that we're looking at? How do we cope with 5 generations in the workplace, because we're starting young and we're working long? How do we cope with the different expectations within our workforce? How do we promote them? How do we give them the career development? How do we manage them? How do we learn around how we, I think about my approach to work, and I think that as a Gen X, I'm probably pretty easy to manage. But I wonder if maybe I've got it wrong, because maybe my much younger Gen Z colleagues who are going, no, I only work 9 to 5. I take my hour for lunch and I don't work at weekends. Maybe they've got it right. Maybe I've got it wrong, checking my emails every Sunday night to make sure I go into a clear inbox on a Monday morning. Maybe I'm the one in the wrong. And I have to learn to manage that. And my expectations around that are really interesting, because I catch myself sometimes going, well, where are they? They're supposed to be here. They're supposed to be doing that. And I'm like, that's my view of the world. That's my expectation of how you work. Actually, is this the generation? And look, Gen Zs are now 29. They're not kids anymore. But is this the generation that are going to really help us shift to that output-focused work rather than input-focused, because of how they view things? And I think for those of us that are in our 50s and perhaps at the other end of our career, that's quite challenging. And it's going to be really interesting to see.
And it changes so quickly. I mean, from my parents' generation, who were whatever the one before boomers were really.
The forgotten generation.
The forgotten generation. And then to us exclusive Gen X's, we're a small slice, but we're in our prime at the moment. And then through, I mean, there's, the attitudes to work have adapted massively. And I think, organizations have a task in trying to keep up with that.
And I'm not sure organizations have caught up with it. So I think that we still, and I think this kind of circles back to education. I'm not sure education's caught up with it. We're still educating in the same way. We're still treating these young people in a I think teachers do a brilliant job. It's not a job I could do, but we're teaching them in a very instructional way. Where are we teaching that critical thinking? Where are we helping them to really prepare for when they come into the workplace? That there isn't going to be giving them a timetable. There isn't going to be someone telling them exactly where they need to be in most roles. So where is that? How are we adapting education to the new world of work? And I'm not sure we've got that right yet. I feel like there's still quite a gap between those two things. That is another place where we as people hopefully come in and try and plug that gap a bit.
I can't get out of my head at the moment the phrase that I had this morning in a conversation I was having with a group where we were discussing relevance and people searching for relevance in their lives and in their work. And this comes from a lot of interaction with indigenous groups, indigenous peoples. And someone came out with this amazing phrase that she'd been told by an Aboriginal elder quite recently, I think. He said, we used to teach people how to live. Now we teach people how to make a living. And I think there are great elements of that in just what you've said as well, is that we sort of lost touch with someone. And maybe that Gen X who are much more focused on their 9 to 5 have got got a better grasp of it than we do. So
Maybe, but we have that, I think we had that, we came from that kind of Protestant work ethic, didn't we? That the boomers and the forgotten generation had, and we came at that digital revolution, and so we brought this new freedom and this new difference. Well, my generation of women, we're really the first generation who were expected to have it all, because the family structure, the social structures, all of those changed. And so it's fascinating to think that we were expected to have it all. I think I've got my phone down here in front of me. I can remember my first phone. It was a brick. But now I wouldn't go anywhere without my phone, and that's got my life in it. And so that's changed in 30 years. In my first job, 3 of us shared an email, which we dialed up in the morning, dialed up at lunchtime, and dialed up in the evening. So that always on, that difference, we're still trying to deliver work, and I don't think it's just us. I think it's a whole generation. It's a large swathe of our work. We're delivering work in an analog system for a digital world, and I think the generations that are coming through have got a different view of the world. And so that 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, and I appreciate that doesn't take into account hospitality and people that work another way, but that kind of 9 to 5 Monday Friday, that how we do things, the working to the quarters, the fitting in that way. You will work in the way that I work. I don't know if we continue to do that, we look like dinosaurs to these other people coming through. And we have to adjust. We have to learn to adjust, because otherwise we're not going to have future leaders we're not going to have organizations that these people can lead in the future, because we're not shaping our system and process for those leaders. And yeah, there's a risk, isn't there, that we get stuck and that we age out and we don't know where we fit anymore.
are these things that you actively sort of consider in your current role? I mean, the Royal British Legion is, classically we think of it, in terms of old men, really, Remembrance Parade and Chelsea pensioners and things like that. But clearly there are lots of young people in it, and there are lots of service people who are benefiting now, who are presumably in their 20s, 30s, and 40s too.
So yes, I think when people think of the Legion, they think of Remembrance, they think of Poppies, they think of the Blazer Brigade, they think of these guys, and they are the heart and soul of what we do. They are amazing people. We've got 200,000 members, we've got 2,000 branches. They are doing brilliant, solid work. And the things that they do in their local communities around supporting their communities, supporting the veterans, supporting the armed forces communities and the families of armed forces community, of those that have served, is amazing. But interestingly, the average age of our beneficiaries, so someone who might phone up who needs support, and we do anything from a coffee morning where you might be the only other person that person speaks to in a week, because of, where they live and those sorts of things, through to someone that has literally nothing, no food in their house and no money. So we will help them to do that. Or you've got homeless veterans, or you've got issues with other things. But the average age is coming down every year of the beneficiaries that we support. And I think our average age is around 53 now. I'd have to double check that. But I think our average age is around 53. And, the armed forces community looks very different from when perhaps you and I think of the Legion and what that looks like. And before I joined the Legion, I didn't know any of this. I've learned it since then. We've got a brilliant research team within the Legion who do some fantastic stuff, and they've just done some really interesting work around the census and the armed forces community from that census data. But you've got an increasing number of women in the armed forces they're still underrepresented. It's still male dominated, but it is increasing every year. You've got a real mix of socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnicity. Obviously, it's less so on things like disability, but there is a really interesting kind of mix of neurodiversity now that neurodiversity is becoming much more understood. I think previously, if somebody was considered to be neurodiverse, they probably would have gone, oh, maybe the armed forces isn't the right place for me. Whereas now I think people are realizing that you can work in that. So that's going to be quite interesting coming forward. And that's who our beneficiaries are. That's who we support. And, when you think about, you and I will remember Bosnia. That was 30 years ago.
Galling thought, really.
Yeah. And we've got Afghanistan and we've got Iraq and the state of the world at the moment. I think our armed forces community is going to be relied upon and is fantastic. The other thing which I haven't talked about, which I think is really interesting and is a really different part of what we do, is we support the Invictus Games. So we help run Team UK for the Invictus Games, which is such a celebration of that community. And again, but also much younger. So it's not those older veterans. It is those much younger veterans. That's fascinating. And that's really interesting group. But it's that perception And I think as an organisation, part of the reason we've got our new strategy is we're having to change. We have to change to reflect the population that we are serving. I mean, I was fortunate enough to go to the Festival of Remembrance this year, and the number of World War II veterans is decreasing every year. That's sad and that's heartbreaking, but also we have to, as any organisations, we need to reflect the community that we serve. But we don't want to forget. We want to remember and recognise and honour those people that have served. So it's a lovely mix of really exciting
But I
new
think what's
service.
really interesting about it is, and you've through your interim roles have worked in a sort of huge. I mean, there are lots of sort of construction companies and civil engineering companies. I saw CalMac was in that list, Caledonian McBrain, the ferry company on the west coast of Scotland. I mean, there's a lot of purpose in the British Legion. People know why. It's very clear what it exists for and why it exists. And I don't suppose anyone's working in it to make lots of money. They're doing it because there's meaning in it and it's something they want to do. I suspect to an extent that's probably the same with the CalMac ferries on the west coast of Scotland as well, that people are drawn to that kind of work. But I mean, some of the other places that you've worked, I saw HS2 was on that list.
I did a period at HS2, again, in a change period. They had a complete restructure when they went from getting the powers. So this was back in 2016, maybe. They went from getting the powers, so signed off that they were allowed to build, to starting to build the railway. And that's a very different workforce. So the workforce who were doing all the legal work and all the politicians' work and all of that was a very different skill set to people who then needed to plan and build. And so we had to have a complete change in that workforce. And I had the opportunity to go in and do some project management around a behavioural and organisational change, which was really good. And I thoroughly enjoyed, but very different. But HS2 is a bit quango-y. So it's kind of it's almost like an arm's length body in terms of it's still quite governmental in terms of its structure and its openness. I think my most commercial was Shire Pharmaceuticals, which at the time was a FTSE 40 business. And that was going into a pharmaceutical company was really interesting, particularly because I spent a lot of time in facilities management and construction. So facilities management and construction, you're talking through a 4% to a 13% margin, small margins, cash poor, really thinking about, right, which suppliers we're paying this week so we're not on stop, so we can pay our people. Lots of hourly paid, high turnover of staff, lots of cheapy transfers, people moving around, to a 70% margin, very American focused pharmaceutical company who were doing some amazing work on some new drugs, but also were having some other stuff come into the time that actually anybody could copy it and license it and run it in the same. So they were constantly having this battle with shareholders. And I was, again, the leaders that you work for make such a difference, don't they? So I worked for a chap called Graham, who I was the corporate functions people director, and I worked for the CFO and the chief legal counsel, and Graham was the CFO, and he really taught me about that capital value and what that meant for shareholders, and how, when we were thinking about our people and our work, that shift in being structured very much for both making sure you had the right people and they were in an environment they could benefit from, but really thinking about shareholder value. And he would instill that. And it was the first time as a people director and people leader that I had a commercial leader who was like, no, you need to come on the market call because you need to understand what we're saying about our shares and how we're working, because that will inform how we build capability, how we organize ourselves and how we train. And so as an organization, that became quite cultural across everybody, that it didn't matter what role you're in and what you did, you understood how the organization was performing because you were then able to understand how you fitted in. So even though you may not have been as purpose driven as perhaps something like the British Legion, actually you did understand how what you were doing impacted and supported the delivery of the business, and how your role fitted in that, which led to really high engagement scores, really people who stayed a long time, people who were very committed and supportive of the organisation because they knew what impact they had. They knew how what they were doing could impact not just the share price, but also the patients, the end users. I mean, we had one particular drug which was for something called Duchenne's disease, and we knew patients. You knew patients within the organisation who were still living because of the drugs that this pharmaceutical company had developed and sold, there was some amazing work being done around creating and I don't know whether it ever happened, creating a patch to go over diabetic ulcers on people's feet from fascinating. I learned stuff about skin cells I didn't need to know, but you learned that stuff. And so even though it was shareholder value, it was about share price, it was a commercial business, it was about profit. Actually, the way in which they told those stories internally and they made sure people knew what was going on.
But that was done intentionally, though.
Yeah. Yeah, it felt purposeful, though. You felt that you were, even though, we had the most fantastic long-term incentive plans, there was a really good reward structure, everyone wanted to know what was happening with shareholder value because everybody in the organization got some shares every year, so you kept that in and you kept that going. But actually, the story that they told, the way they were structured, the behavioral stuff they did, the values, the culture, all of that felt very purpose-driven, even though with hindsight, you can look back and go, oh no, that was about shareholder value. That was about making sure we had the highest.
The two needn't necessarily be disconnected, dislocated. I mean, organizations are there for a purpose, and part of that purpose, not the pure purpose, but part of that purpose is they have to make money. But the other part is they have to deliver the product, the service, and the two things need to go, hand in hand.
Yeah, and I think that was a great example of where they showed that really well. Because, like I say, no one hid behind the shareholder value. The shares were there. We had the quarterly market calls. Anyone could join the quarterly market calls. It was really encouraged to understand how the business was succeeding and being successful. We did a lot of work around procurement value. Graham used to like us to fix the roof while the sun shines. So when things are going well, he'd be like, right, how do we fix this? What can we improve? Those sorts of things. But it was that great balance, and that purposeful was really good. I'm not sure that a lot of organizations get that very well. So I'm not sure a lot of organizations are great at sharing. Yes, making money is important. Yes, that's how we keep the lights on. That's how we do this. We have shareholders. We have to return value. But actually, we do that through good ethical business, through a purpose-driven thing, through delivering great work, through amazing research and development. I'm not sure that everyone gets that.
Absolutely not. I mean, I had a conversation with Isaac Getz and Laurent Marbacher, who've just published their book, The Caring Company. And one of those companies that they look at is a Japanese pharmaceutical company, so same line of business as Shire's. I think it was called Eisai. And they were telling a very similar story about how they got the marketing people and the finance people to go into care homes because they were doing lots of geriatric products and meet these people precisely because of what you were saying. So they then understood that there were real people at the end of this they were serving, although indirectly, in their particular roles, wherever it was. But they then felt that connection to it.
When you bring that back to the kind of micro level in a workplace, I wonder if there's something there about how we manage and how we lead if we don't see our people and we don't see them as people. So if you're leading a large team of people that you don't see very often, you don't know them individually, you don't know the impact it has on them. I wonder if that impacts how thoughtful we are and how we make our decisions as leaders and how we make our decisions in that day to day. I'm thinking about something about this kind of remote working piece. How do you build those relationships? How do you have those connections? But also, if you think about within our care homes, we've got brilliant care home managers, but they have 24/7 staff. They won't see everyone all the time. There may be some turnover of that staff. If they don't know the impact and know that Joy, who's working in this role, actually is looking after a disabled son and they're doing this and they're doing that as well. And so for me as a people director, I'm thinking about how do I ensure that my managers and my leaders and my supervisors feel able to build that knowledge base so that when they're making decisions, yes, they're making them in the best for us as a business. They're thinking about our beneficiaries. They're keeping within the law. But also they've got that very personal understanding. So they understand the drivers for that individual, but also the risks perhaps for that individual. It's quite a lot going on there, but there's some interesting stuff there for me.
But I think that it's quite, there's a simple thing to do, which is to get people who aren't in a people-facing role in the organization to occasionally go out and meet the people who are benefiting from what the organization is doing. I suspect in the Royal British Legion, that's easier to do because it's so obvious that you're in a people support business. I mean that's what it is. I don't know, maybe not, but in HS2 it's probably rather more difficult.
So I was reading this American company called DoorDash, which does what it says on the tin. So if you order groceries or you order something, it collects it and brings it for you. And they have a scheme that everybody in their organization has to do a certain amount of DoorDash shifts and a certain amount of dashing every year to access a discount on DoorDash for themselves. So in order to get your benefit, you have to do so much a year. But it means that everybody from post room to CFO has to DoorDash, so they know what the bulk of their people are doing. It's that back to the floor thing, isn't it? It's I think Marks and Spencers do it as well, don't they? Where everyone has to go and do some shop days, and I know lots of organisations do. And I think if you can do it in a way that's not performative, that's not me showing up and screwing a top and going, oh, look at me, I've screwed a top, now can I go now? Or I've put a high vis on and a hard hat, but actually I wouldn't know what to do with anything. If it's not performative, that can be really powerful for you as an individual in that understanding, but also for your organisation because, yes, CEO, CFO, whatever, they know what I do. They get what I do. That's really interesting, isn't it? And that maybe we need to tell the stories about where we came from as well. So when I talk about in the people team and we talk about people admin, I mean, I love ER. I love employee relations. I come from a bit of an employee relations background, and I talk about file notes and building cases and having case files. And I see these more, less experienced and earlier in their careers, ER people looking at me like I'm a weirdo. And I'm like, no. This is the foundational stuff that's really going to help you get through. But now, because I'm 4 months in and they're used to me going on about stuff now, they know that I've done their job and I've been there and I've done it. And I'm not just talking about it because I'm like, oh, this is good practice. I'm talking about it because I believe it and I've enjoyed it. So I've built some credibility with them because they know I've done it.
Yeah. No, I think it is about that sort of personal interaction, isn't it? That feeling that we're in this together. Yeah. I mean, going back to that bit about meeting the customer, even if you're nowhere near the customer in a large organization, that gives your job purpose. You understand why you're doing it. And I think that really applies to people in the middle of organizations because they're buried too often in the flow and process of daily work. And to have the opportunity to get out and just sort of reconnect.
Yeah, so if you've got a finance business partner, maybe they've got a team of FP&A people, maybe they're doing some great work. But actually, if you've got these people and they're working in a way, but they never get to see Poppy Appeal for us. We have something called London Poppy Day. We encourage everyone to go and we encourage our employees to go and take part and go and collect for the Poppy Appeal on that day. But that might be that finance business partner's only opportunity to actually go and see what we do and interact with and how we do. And it could be really easy for those people in that powerful middle, that really important place, be really easy for them to just come and do great work without seeing that kind of the effort that comes through into it. So how it's actually delivered on the ground or in person, but also how it's seen from a strategic leadership, powerful point of view. And there's a risk, isn't there? Those people come in every day, do great work, deliver what they need to deliver, but we don't allow them or expose them. I think it might be difficult in larger organizations because I guess in smaller organizations, you see people and you know what's going on. And I wonder if there's something about if you leave something behind. So if you go from being a peer, having that role, and you move into this leadership role where you let's be honest, the more senior you get, the less work you do, the more meetings you go to. I looked at my diary for next week and I'm like, I'm not entirely sure when I'm getting any work done next week. And yes, meetings are work and coaching is work and being in this is work. But also, I'm very fortunate. I have a brilliant PA. I know how lucky I am to have one. And she is very good at in looking at my diary in a week and going, right, you have a little bit of a slot there. I'm blocking that out for you to actually do some work. And she forces that on me. But I'm not sure. I have the power to do that because I'm at a level and I've got to that. I don't think we do that in the middle, do we? We don't do that in that place
No,
where we have.
And I think that's absolutely key. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily just blocking out space in your diary to do work in that sort of task fashion. It's also blocking out space to do some reflection and understanding around your role. And we talk about this lots in the Power Between is the importance of what I call stop, pause, and reflect. And someone was referring to, what was it? Pause, consider, act. But it's essentially the same thing. But it's creating space because space is becoming the part that we don't have.
Yes.
And it takes real discipline to do
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
And that is easier, as you say, in a senior role than it is in a middle role. Because
So I think there are disciplines and there are things you can do that start that behavior. So there is a lady called Grace Beverly. She's got something called the productivity method, and she runs a business called Tala, which I think is it's a leisurewear, athleisurewear. I may be doing that a disservice, but she's called Grace Beverly. She's, I don't know, early 30s, maybe late 20s. And she's shared this thing called the productivity method, which is fascinating. And she encourages 8 minutes a day in this. I'm looking around me because it's a little book it's a little book called the productivity method, and it's 8 minutes a day. But what she encourages is that you spend 5 minutes every morning just stopping, planning your day, but you don't just put your diary in. You're doing, what's the attitude and mindset I'm taking today? What's the thing I'm going to stick to? What's the distraction I'm going to consciously avoid? And there's those things. But then the other side of that is she encourages at least 3 minutes at the end of every day to go, what happened today? How did it go? What am I proud of? What would I like to change? What did I miss? And it's a discipline that I think that at any level you can have some control over that, can't you?
And if we can't find 8 minutes, especially when we split it into two blocks, then we've not got control of our lives, basically.
But we learn things through discipline, don't we? And we learn things through habit, and we learn things through repeating.
Yeah, no, it's a muscle, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. And I wonder if we, as you or I, in fortunate positions I reckon I'm going to be working for another 20 years. So I say the other end of my career. I think
we're
I'm
not
going to
at
be
the beginning
working
of
till I'm
it. Put it that
73. So yeah, I don't know which phase of life I'm in, but I'm in the next
but
one.
we're not at the setting out phase.
No. If we can encourage and allow that space, and I'm thinking, we're talking about that kind of middle. If we think about that for line managers, first line managers, that middle space, if we allow that discipline and that space, and it doesn't have to be this particular method, it could be anything you do, we're going to build that resilience in. Because the other thing that does, and I'm reluctant to kind of move into mental health and those sorts of well-being things, but we are seeing an increase in burnout in organizations. We're seeing an increase because of this always on, because of this expectation, because of just one more thing, or I'm just going to check my emails on here. I'm going to check, because we're seeing an increase in that. If we encourage this tiny discipline of check in, check out, I wonder if actually we'll have more productive people, happier people. They will stay with organizations longer because they feel cared about. They'll do more productive work because they're removing some of that noise. They're removing that space. And then they themselves will bring through more productive people, happier people.
There's a definite sort of virtuous circle to it, isn't there? That if you can role model it and you can show it and you can encourage others to do it too, then engagement goes up, performance goes up, productivity goes up, the organization's happy, but more importantly, the individuals feel more in control and more, their well-being improves. And one can get terribly sort of overexcited about it and say, well, that then expands in the ripples then go out and affect how they are at home. They improve your health. They probably improve the way you deal with your children or
your
relationships,
everything.
your relationships. It creates a better cycle.
Roddy, if we just created world peace.
Yeah, we just have created world peace, and that's what the power between is all about. Is solving this issue. I'm not entirely sure that all world leaders entirely subscribed to this relational.
Oh, I don't know. A little cow print book, I think, could take them all. I could imagine it at Davos, them all going around with their cow print prints. I think the world would be a much greater place. Just take 5 minutes at the beginning of the day and 3 minutes at the end of the day to have a little bit of reflection. It'll be better for all of us.
But I do strongly believe that it's a lot of these small changes don't require a massive reorganization of the entire organization.
Do you think that sometimes, though, I think as a society, we're always looking for the big bang, aren't we? We're looking for the big impact, the big thing. Who's that? Oh, it was the Dave Brailsford, wasn't it?
The marginal
gains.
Marginal gain. Yeah.
Approve 100 things by 1% rather than one thing by 100%.
1%. Yeah.
And I wonder if we lose that sometimes in this, everyone's busy, everything has to be the big bang, everything has to be the next big thing and really flashy. And I wonder if a little bit of that, actually, those marginal gains will make the difference.
I mean, I think we lose sight of the importance of them. And for the people in the middle of organizations that can't make the big strategic changes, they don't have those levers available to them, that, it is the marginal gains that you can change. But we need to create the confidence to do it.
Well, that's where they find their power. If I think about, the power between them and what you and I have talked about previously about that, I call my middle managers my secret sauce. They're the thing. They're the ones that make these things happen. If I can get, from a change point of view, from a people and behavior point of view, if I can get them on board, that's my secret sauce. That's gonna make things work. I'm gonna get adoption. I'm gonna get engagement. They are my secret sauce. So anything we can do to encourage and give them power can only be good for not just how people show up at work, but for the bottom line. Be that for a charity like ourselves, where we're trying to improve things for beneficiaries, and we want to make sure we've got our fundraising in, and we're using that money in a way that's really making an impact for our beneficiaries. To a retail organisation, to a FTSE listed company, it's going to impact both that bottom line, but also remove some of that friction that we deal with day to day, which can make people's lives smoother.
But it's not easy, though. And we know to a large extent, the theory has it there with all the different ingredients that's required. I'm riffing towards I'm terribly excited about this analogy or metaphor. But your secret sauce, as we know with sauces, can curdle quite easily too. So you may have all the right ingredients, but you just put it on slightly too high a heat, or you mix it too hard, or whatever.
And we've seen it, haven't we? But we've both seen it. We've seen it. We've seen what on the surface looks like a perfect storm. You've got the right people. You've promoted the right person into the right role, or you've brought in these fantastic tools. You've done it, but actually, you something's off kilter. Something's not hit. But that's the beautiful thing about the career that I've chosen. I'm working with people, not widgets.
Well, they're forever adaptable, but they're also unpredictable.
Oh my goodness, my life would be so much easier sometimes without people, but I do love them, and I do love working with them, and
It would be a lot less interesting, though.
Well, exactly. And yeah, the world would be a much worse place if we were all just robots, I think. Personally, that's my view of it. But yeah, that balancing, that balance of how we give people the tools, give them the space, promote the right people, give them that support, but then we need to set them up in a structure that allows them to deliver. If we do all of that, but then go, and now we're just going to add all this pressure, and we're going to do this, I think you explained it when I said, turn that heat up too high, we risk undoing all that good work.
All the good work, yeah. And interesting, I mean, a lot of the organizations you worked in are quite mature, and I've been having lots of conversations with people who are in scale-ups and growing very fast. I think there's even more of a challenge there, although perhaps that purpose that we were talking about earlier, it's easier to see what the immediate objective is in a fast-growing company.
I'm working with a CEO at the moment. It's a friend of mine who I have conversations with occasionally, who's just gone through her second round of funding as she's scaling up, and I saw her for a coffee early. This is the thing. So I saw her for a coffee early this week because that was the only time we could both do, because we were both terrible at doing things. And it was, I don't know, it was like 7:45 one morning. And I was just like, you're going to have to carve out time to recruit someone. Because if you don't, all this great work you're doing is going to fail. So, and that scale up, that point, when do you carve out the time to build your team? And it happens organically, don't you? We've seen it. I've done a little bit of scale up work. It's been really interesting. I've done, gone from 150 to 300 people. My best one went from 36 to 1,500, but that was much more organised.
Yeah, that's quite a scale up.
Yeah. It was a cheapie. It was good. It was fine. But that kind of, that scale up, and the scale up that I did was 150 to 300 was to go through our next round of market funding. So it was very much about getting it ready, organising with that funding in mind. But that entrepreneurial spirit, the do it all, the have it all, the be everything, that can cast quite a shadow, can't it, on an organisation as it grows? And if people continue at that, that's going to be really interesting.
Well, and the other part about that is, of course, that when you're driving to get the business to a position that you can do a next round of funding, then you are chasing KPIs and whatever that are purely designed to impress the investors. And that 9 times out of 10 is not the right thing for the
Yeah,
people
not always the widest decisions are made at that point, aren't they?
of the people side of the business. I mean that's when the sauce curdles, because and you see it with all these mergers that look absolutely fantastic on the accounts, and how we're going to do everything, but then you bring the cultures together, and there's a great deal to explore and discuss around that. Time is I'm feeling like
Yeah, I feel like we've gone on a nice road there. I think we've talked, we've talked a lot about we talked about purpose, didn't we? Which I quite enjoyed, and then we kind of gone into actually tools and structures and how do we support and
no, it's important to shining a light on this stuff is really important. So Amanda, thank you very, very much.
no, thank you so much. 45 minutes to reflect and actually think is such a pleasure. I really
Well, there we go.
appreciate
We've
you
done it
allowing me
ourselves.
that.
Yeah. Thank you.